Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Open Solano County Local Food System Alliance. The Alliance started in 2017, first as the working group, as an advisory board, to figure out whether we even have a local food system in the county. And it has grown to this informal but mighty group with various stakeholders. We have farmers, we have community organizations, we have food co-op, we have nonprofits, Department of Public Health. And what brought us all together is the vision to create environmentally sustainable, economically viable, and socially just local food system in the county. It's a long shot, it's a long-term vision. So we are very happy to have you all here. I know a couple more people will be coming in, but today we are pleased to welcome Trish Kelly, who is an executive director of the Valley Vision nonprofit in Sacramento. It's a civic leadership organization that works to create, I really love it, Trish, bold solutions to improve people's life in our region. And among few areas of their willpower, there is a workforce, there is clean economy, innovation, civic engagement. One that is very dear and near to our hearts is food and agriculture. And Valley Vision did an incredible work of pulling together Sacramento region food system action plan. So what we're talking about is a regional effort. And today we would like to hear more about what's shaping up as a region and then have a conversation. How does Solano County fits into this big picture? And Trish been a fearless leader for 7 years now, right? So please take it from here and welcome and thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Elena, for having us. And I want to thank Stephanie and Allison and everybody for reaching out to us last summer and engaging with us and letting us know more about what you're doing. And I want to introduce you to Grace Kaufman too, who's a program manager at Valley Vision, and she's really shepherded this project through 6 months ago. Grace didn't know as much about the food system, but I'd say she's an expert now. It's a deep immersion. So we're just really happy to have the conversation because we are neighbors, and we've done a lot of project work over the years where we're very intersected, and we're all part of a food shed and the labor market shed and a commute shed. So I think it's a very natural conversation to have, and really looking forward to having a dialogue with you. And I'll give you a little bit of background about our work in the food space. Valley Vision's a little over 25 years old. We got started with the base closures in McClellan and Mather in the 90s, and kind of a community response to how could we, respond, recover, and diversify the economy. But food and ag has always been a mainstay, as you know. And so Valley Vision, it started with the idea of taking a regional approach to the economy, but in a partnership way. And I actually was working with Valley Vision in 1999 for the start of this regional work and something called the Green Valley Alliance. So it was really with the goal to preserve ag, the viability of ag, and not convert land to other uses, but to keep ag viable. And part of it was also to meet our air quality attainment issues, because as you know, the Valley is not in attainment, and that would have a lot of other impacts. But I think for us, the culture and the heritage of us as an agriculture region is really important for people. So in the 2000s, the region, the Council of Governments, embarked on a blueprint project to look at how the region would grow. And Valley Vision was hired to be the community engagement partner. And that really began to solidify our role more as a convener and a bridge to action across the whole region. And so with the engagement side, we work with SACOG, which developed very sophisticated tools and it was vision planning, but also scenarios planning. So people could see what would happen if they made different choices around land use. And it really catalyzed a change in the whole thing of the area just developing and paving over all of our farmland. And people could visualize what build out would look like of existing current general plans and things like that. So that really was a big change for us. It embedded us more in the food and ag world, but also kind of the community engagement side. And I think SACOG really became a leader in a project called the Rural Urban Connection Strategy, RUCS. And the whole thing about RUCS was to kind of build a rural blueprint to connect with the urban blueprint to ensure not only the preservation of farmland, but that rural communities were vital and that we recognize the interdependence of our rural and urban areas. So I did a lot of work on and off. I worked for another nonprofit, a statewide nonprofit that connected state and regional work. So I've been engaged in those kind of planning efforts with Valley Vision as a civic partner over the years. And then in 2009, we had a grant from the California Endowment to begin to convene people across the food system in a food system collaborative because we were pretty fragmented and lots of different system partners. I think kind of what you're trying to do. So it was a challenge because, you know, it's a big region and it was probably more YOLO and Sacramento centric, but we did that for almost 6 years. And then that spun off into a food policy council in Sacramento. And we looked at a lot of models about how to organize ourselves. So being a collaborative was good. We brought a lot of people to the table like you're talking about, including school districts and school programs, things like that, education, food literacy, food banks, lots of partners. It was one of the first times that farmers started coming into these conversations because we were trying to break down the silos. And then, but what we found is that from a governance standpoint, it was hard because we didn't have the ability to do decision making around policy. So we could do a lot of convening, and that's when things spun off to the Food Policy Council. And so what we did was we went more into both food security and food wellness with the school district. That's how we continued our California Endowment grant through building healthy communities. And that particular project was a network of community partners that was doing things like urban agriculture and food security in South Sacramento. And then we also did sort of the economy side. So we got a designation from the federal government to promote food and beverage manufacturing, but the ecosystem. So it was things like innovation, workforce, sustainability, infrastructure. And you know, we talked with Elena before about broadband being a driver for us as well. So that's kind of the food background. I've been working on and off in food and ag for a long time. I've been, you know, a consultant that's done economic analysis of the clusters, but also we do research, and you'll see in our overview here some of the research we've done about food system metrics. And we do support for project partners like incubators. We're going to start a YOLO Food Hub project soon. We're really excited about that. We just got a USDA grant. So and through our regional economic strategy, we're really trying to promote food projects, whether they be a little mobile food truck all the way up to a food innovation center. And we've got some jurisdictions that are working on that. And I think especially the alignment that you've had in the past with Yolo County and the fact that UC Davis is partly in Yolo County, there's just a lot of natural fits. So that's kind of our background. And I think the other thing is because we work in different domains, like we work in workforce, we work in cleaner air, we're able to bring some of those partnerships into the food discussion. So the plan is a regional action plan. And Grace and I are the project team members on this with some other team members who also worked on a resilience food system poll that we did that was released in October. And I'll tell you about that when we get into the background. Next slide, please. Oh, and just to note, we have the We Are Farm to Fork because we partner with a lot of organizations. We manage a steering committee that came out of Visit Sacramento, which promoted the brand. And now the We Are Farm to Fork is the community brand. that we're going to be working on to kind of elevate all aspects of the food system, and we're working on a website for that. So it's kind of what we're trying to do is do a better job of telling our story. But our lofty vision here about Valley Vision is to work on our region's biggest challenges with, you know, a goal toward a livable future, but it's really around a triple bottom line of equity, prosperity, and environmental sustainability. And we really try to use a lot of our research and collaboration to kind of push for the policy advocacy and the action, either ourselves or support our partners and leaders to do that, and our community stakeholders. So we have several impact areas, and food and ag is one of those, but they do intersect with our other areas. So next slide, please. So the goal of this food system action plan really is to increase the resiliency of the food system. And it's an update of a 2015 plan that we did with the Sacramento Region Community Foundation. And they affiliate with the YOLO Foundation and then partner with Placer and El Dorado Community Foundation. So we were looking to update the 2015 plan, which was really sort of a roadmap for the food system. And then the pandemic hit, so it kind of became even more important to deal with what the disruptions were in the food system. And the conversation, though, since the 2015 report had focused a lot on the nonprofit sector, which deals with a lot of the issues in the food system, as well as the emergency food system. And so the Community Foundation invested a lot of money in the food bank to, they transitioned from a direct service to a Feeding America site and kind of aligned over 240 partners. And so they looked at a lot of things like, where is poverty and food insecurity? How do we get food closer to people? And what kind of food infrastructure do we need to be able to do this? We need food hubs, we need logistics and distribution, we need cold storage facilities, and we need to train staff on how to handle more fresh produce, because they really were looking to increase the partnerships with growers and get food, healthy food to people. So multiple goals, not just food, but healthy food, improving nutrition. So the shift for this plan was to really, though, try to get to what are the priorities for projects beyond capacity building, and what kind of financing strategies and mechanisms do we need to really invest in this food system. So the plan covers 4 counties. Normally our research or our projects include Yuba and Sutter, but this is the impact area for the foundation. So we wanted to look at the challenges that the system is facing, but also opportunities. And then a lot of focus on what are best practices already happening, mostly in the region, but people talked about things from all over, and we did research that way and looking at good case studies, and then coming up with areas for funding recommendations for priorities. And hopefully we're going to have a next phase where we can actually look at some specific funding sources and funding mechanisms. So next slide, please. So we had a pretty short time frame. We got started in May, and we did research all the way through, and some of it was updating data from the last report, but looking at some new data, especially around food security and food access. But we did 6 listening sessions around the 6 topics of the work scope, and then we did some group interviews, and we did one-on-one, and we continued to do this through the fall, even though we started actually trying to synthesize data. It's an ongoing thing because there's just so many more people to reach out to and talk to. And today will be another outreach piece for us because there's shared topics. And then through all this, and we were trying to synthesize and analyze the data. There's a lot of intersectionality across the information. It took us a while to try to organize the data, but we have the plan, and so we'll appreciate your feedback on that. And next slide, please. So these are our 6 strategic focus areas, intersected, as I mentioned. They build off the 4 original goals from 2015 15. But what we found is that those goals were kind of limiting because the food system here and elsewhere has evolved. So we looked a lot about how other regions were looking at the food systems. And then some areas like environmental sustainability were kind of mentioned in 2015, but not so much called out, but they're a huge area of focus now. And as we were having these sessions, you know, the world was either flooding or burning up, and fires and droughts and everything. So it kind of made the case about what we're facing and the health and economic challenges of that. And then we called out careers in food and agriculture more. So we'll go through now, and I can take you through each area. And what we did, as I mentioned, is we had kind of some key metrics or statistics for each area. And next slide, please. And then we talked about some of those key challenges. Oh, I forgot. So one of the things that we did was we asked at the start of each of the 6 sessions for people's perspective on how they ranked the status of what they thought was planning and policy support for the food system. And except for the viability of ag, nobody ranked anything even over 3 out of 5. So it kind of shows you that we talk a good game, but we're not that far along, at least in people's perceptions. Viability of ag, I think it's because we've done more planning work, like I mentioned in the RUCS program. The nonprofits have been trying to work on some of these issues, but we have, you know, a long way to go. And this is by people working in the food system. So some people actually thought that we're doing a better job of planning as well, except for food security and food access, but that but the policies and programs are kind of lagging. So it's kind of reinforcing the call to action. Next slide, please. So the first area was the viability of ag. And one of the goals in our area is to get more new farmers in the pipeline, kind of support the next generation of farmers. But, and it's kind of interesting when we looked at the census of ag. So almost 30% of farmers are tagged as new and beginning farmers. They're not that young, really. It takes a long time to become a farmer, as you know. But also across the region, 95% are white, which doesn't really reflect the diversity of our community either. The average size of the farm overall aggregated across the 4 counties is 196 acres, but it really ranges across the counties. The Placer and El Dorado County have smaller ag, vet specialty crops, orchards, things like that, some livestock. Yuba and Sutter are more kind of export crops, and Yolo County's farms are pretty big as well. So that's kind of they're multi-generational farms though, and a lot of that land has been converting to orchards, but a lot of specialty crops also that go to the Bay Area. So access to land is a huge barrier, including other things, of course, you know, access to capital. Broadband is a huge issue for our farmers. It's hard to compete in the marketplace. It's hard to deploy ag technology without access to that. And, you know, the technology helps farmers resource manage as well. So farmers face a lot of challenges. And so we want to ensure that we're supporting farmland, farm products, and farmers and workers. And I think there's a lot of appreciation for them, but how does it actually translate to actual policies and resources? So next slide, please. The recommended actions include, and you're going to see this a lot, the funding mechanisms or the resources. And in the next phase of the project, we're going to get more targeted about some of these things. But Grace prepared a resource guide that is on our website because we were trying to gather information as we went along. There's this huge amount of funding for the first time ever coming into the food system from state and federal agencies as a response to the pandemic. And then also some of that's flowing to local government. And so local governments, some of them are using their recovery funds for some of these issues. But what we're really asking for is more intentional investment. And the original focus was on philanthropy because we're underinvested in our region, especially not only by statewide well, not only national, but statewide even. A lot of the foundations don't invest in the Valley. So we're trying to raise the profile, but also for other kinds of investment, public, private sector, and government. And so we're trying to be better organized about grants from federal agencies, but this is kind of a call to action too for local governments to invest more in food systems. So that's just an overview, but so they're increasing funding mechanisms and access to capital and land, equipment, et cetera, for BIPOC farmers and growers, economically challenged, veterans, refugees, women-owned businesses. We're really trying to foster that pipeline for the next generation and increase the capacity of organizations that can help farmers and small entrepreneurs reach local markets and adapt to climate change impacts and changing crop patterns. So part of that is helping farmers apply to some of the programs that the state especially has for healthy soils or water resources and things like that. And you'll see that in environmental sustainability too, but they have to deal with these changes. But the small farmers a lot of times just don't have access to the resources that the larger growers have to help them adapt. So next slide, please. So the environmental sustainability kind of, there tends to be a focus on this in just the growing side, but we looked at it across the whole food system, and that's where that 30 to 40% of waste, it's kind of a known statistic across the whole supply chain with consumers, producers, et cetera, not just the farm field, but that we found in the poll that we did. So we did a poll, a food system resilience poll with Sacramento State and Capital Public Radio. And we've had a polling project for about 3 years on various community topics. So this was the first poll that we did that was tied to a project, planning project. So there's a good intersection of the poll and the food plan. But what we found in the poll is that a pretty high percentage of residents are actually very concerned about climate threats to the food system. So this is a statistically valid poll. So even though the region is diverse politically, it shows you that there is a pretty big shared concern. So that might be information that, you know, would be relevant and useful in Solano County. But of course, the drought came up as a big issue because it affects the water level and quality. And for small growers, especially, well levels are declining and they can't afford to drill or they don't have the resources. But there's also environmental impacts, of course, as you know, if you drill, you drop the water table down. The San Joaquin Valley is having terrible problems there. So really through all of this whole thread is that climate change and development pressures, they haven't been very bad to convert ag farmland, but we expect when the economy comes back up, it's going to put the pressure on. And it is a challenge for us because our region needs housing too. So that's why having our council of government focus on infill and revitalizing existing urban and suburban areas is a policy that we support because we want to keep ag land viable. But the other thing is addressing the new mandates for edible food recovery and reduce food waste. So it's really a challenge and a struggle in the region. Most jurisdictions are not ready, and the nonprofits and the food providers are having a challenge. We've seen some organizations or businesses say they're not going to provide food at events because they don't want to have to deal with food waste and recovery issues, for instance. And so next slide, please. What we talk about in some of our recommendations is really having a sustainable funding stream for edible food waste and recovery programs. And the state has resources, and throughout this convening process, we worked with our state and federal partners, and they gave us a lot of good updated information about programs to help. But this is going to be challenging. Be interested to hear how you are all thinking about dealing with that. And then another thing that we want to do promote is regenerative agricultural processes and practices. And so there's new state funding coming for some of these areas around, especially soil health and water. So how do we build capacity, though, again, as I mentioned, to help farmers be able to apply? And we had a meeting with some of the new people at USDA in Washington about this issue, and they understand that this is a challenge, and they want to build this into some of the grants the way the state of California does. So there's actually technical assistance money as well as actual implementation money. And then really we were trying to look at ways to preserve farmland through things like conservation easements. Conservation easements are for larger parcels of property, so it doesn't necessarily benefit smaller growers that are trying to get in to the food world. But we also did want to increase the knowledge about the benefits of ecosystem services, things like flood control, habitat, remediation. So I think that's a real strand on sustainability as well. Next slide, please. So on our food economy, which of course touches all of these areas, one of our big priorities is to look at institutional procurement and having schools and hospitals and entities like the King's Arena or casinos buy more local. And as you know, to do that, institutions can't buy from every little individual farmer. So that's how we come to the idea of getting food hubs in place and food distribution companies and joint purchasing practices, but also what are the organizations doing to increase that local sourcing? And we do know that there's a huge economic impact to that, and it does create supply chain resiliency. So we've got some real notable examples of institutions doing this. We have Sac City Unified has a central kitchen. They have a big warehouse that's almost 100,000 square feet of space. That's food system infrastructure, and they could do scratch cooking and supply schools. They have been talking about doing joint procurement with UC Davis Health, which has increased its food procurement of local to up to over 40% in the last couple of years. So we're trying to provide more economic opportunity for growers and food entrepreneurs, food products, food distributors. So there are also gaps in CalFresh enrollment. We're leaving a lot of money on the table. That's the direct money we're leaving. If everybody eligible was signed up, we'd have almost $150 million more dollars. Our rates of CalFresh range between 40 and 50% enrollment in all the counties except Sacramento, which is over 80%. So we've really tried to work with our agencies to try to understand their challenges. And I know a lot of that was a problem with COVID. It's hard to outreach and enroll people, but even more, it's a long-term issue. And I'd love to hear from you all about that too, because the state has underinvested in those staffing and resources for a long time. So the other thing we're just trying to promote is CalFresh as the benefit. If we can get infrastructure at farmers markets where vendors can take the EBT, electronic benefit funding, and et cetera, then not only can people buy at the farmers market, but they can do market match programs as well. And we work with a nonprofit, Alchemist CDC, that works through a state network to get the funding to help farmers markets adopt CalFresh vendoring. So that's a big area of opportunity, we feel, both for food access and security and economic development. So we do have lots of competitive advantages to grow the food economy, and you certainly do too in Solano County. So we're trying to look at all avenues to grow the food economy and support the growers and establishments. Next slide, please. So our actions are to invest in a network of food hubs and food system infrastructure, incubators, public markets, school central kitchens, lots of different ways to aggregate to get local food to local market. And food hubs help farmers be more market ready too. They help them with business planning and GAP safety certification and things like that. So we're really pleased that Yolo County gave $2 million to a network of partners in Yolo County to do a food hub there that will be able to sell to these institutional partners. And it includes the food bank and a nonprofit and a Cape Valley farm shop up in Cape Valley. And they're building off the food hub study that we did for SACOG about 7 years ago. So it's sometimes it takes a while to come to market, but that's a really valuable resource if you're interested in looking at a food hub. But we like to think of the food system infrastructure in lots of different ways. We have another partner, a nonprofit that's working on a public market in an underserved neighborhood that would also be a space for food entrepreneurs who come out of their incubator program to actually get retail experience and test and sell products. So all these pieces kind of work together. And, you know, another thing is expanding urban agriculture. What some of our urban agriculture programs are doing is in the pandemic doing more farm stands, but they're going to mobile market models. And so they've gotten some funding to do that. So we want to look at all different kinds of enterprise models. And, you know, the biggest, most organized urban farm program is in West Sacramento. Next slide, please. So the careers in food and ag are really important because if we don't have workers, we can't do any of this. So the average age of a farmer is 57.5 years and the skilled food producers is 56 years. So we've been working in our region with our network of partners in the community colleges, workforce boards, and nonprofits. A lot of the challenges are career awareness and people being interested or seeing food and ag as a place for jobs. And so we try to do a lot of convening with employers and partners about what are the opportunities. It's not just being a farmer, although that's important, but you can be a farm manager, you can be a pest control manager, you can work in food nutrition services, you can work in ag tech, you can operate a drone. You know, there are lots of different things you can do in the food system. And then if you add in hospitality and tourism, you've got even more. And that's a very sadly impacted sector, as we know right now. And so but it's really vital to our community as a farm to fork capital and farmers supporting restaurant supporting growers. Our restaurants are really an important part of the social fabric of our community. And they have asked us to help build the pathways too. So a lot of this workforce development is, you know, skills building to increase more livable wages and ensure a skilled workforce. And we do a lot of work on the manufacturing side because we want to grow not just the next generation of farmers, but of food producers and food entrepreneurs. And agri-food tech growth is just going skyrocket. So these technology skills, these digital skills are really needed across the economy and will help workers have better pathways. And another thing in the food and ag space is helping with the health and safety of workers, of course, the frontline workers that have done so much for the community over the last 2 years. Next slide, please. So we want to support immigrant, refugee, and adult workforce development programs, especially. We think it's kind of an untapped resource to meet our current skills gaps, and then overall promoting career awareness and career pathways. So a lot of focus on next generation farm and manufacturing apprenticeship programs. And this is some of the work we do through our workforce convenings, but also support partners like the Center for Land-Based Learning, which does apprenticeship programs for, and they have a farm academy. They incubate people that come out of their program on their farmland. So we have some really good models for things like that. And then again, looking at agri-food tech skills. And then addressing, again, health and immigration status for frontline workers. We work with the Metro Chamber on our federal policy work, and that's really to adopt the Farm Worker Modernization Act and provide a pathway for residents to legal status, but supporting them with all the things that they deserve as well. So next slide, please. Food security and healthy food access is a big focus of the report. Everybody experienced food insecurity, but we were food insecure at a higher level than this federal level even before the pandemic. We had addressed a lot of our food insecurity through the system improvements that were made starting in 2015. The rates were going down and we were reaching more food insecure people, and then everything kind of went back up again in the pandemic. So we have almost 300,000 residents who are food insecure, 1 in 8 people, but the food insecurity in our poll, self-reported, was even higher. So rather than 12% food insecure, it was 16%. So it's really, really high level of food insecurity, 1 in 6. And so that is the disconnect for us, that we have all this abundance, but we have all of these lack of equity in our food system. So, and the emergency food system is just doing a noble job, but really hard to meet this need. So next slide, please. This is an example of what we did with the mapping data that we got from Feeding America. We showed the change in food levels of food insecurity between 2019 and 2021. 2019 is on your left and 2021 is on the right. So you can see in that blue, that darker blue color, almost to the whole county, and that's 9 to 12% levels of food insecurity. It's really had some hard changes. And then just even before, pockets of food insecurity over 18% in West Sacramento. I'm getting a message that my internet connection is a little unstable, so I hope it holds. So recommended actions are, for one thing, we really want to elevate the emergency food system and the food banks and all their partners, and elevate the need for sustainable multi-year funding and expanded infrastructure and staffing, because the food system is staffed a lot by volunteers, and when COVID hit, that was not viable, especially because a lot of the volunteers are older. So I saw one estimate to meet the needs of food insecurity, it would cost like $150 million. So the food banks are really spending a lot of time cobbling together financing, and they play a critical role in our food system, not just for their mission, but they source from our local growers and food stores. So, and they have facilities for co-sharing. So that's one focus on this area. And then we really wanted to talk about how to increase funding for CalFresh enrollment. It's not just, it's the money is to support the outreach, the staffing. We know there's a lot of issues around platforms, technology platforms. There's target groups that are hard to reach. And one issue that really came up was higher ed students, up to 40% food insecurity, including with UC Davis students. So big challenge. And then also wanting to look at ways to expand food access in underserved neighborhoods. So that's where things like mobile markets and farm stands come through. But people are really doing some interesting innovations. So we want to see how we can support projects. Some of the funding through the pandemic has gone to mobile food trucks and things like that. So lots of different ways to try to get to action here. So next slide is the last food issue, the health and nutrition. So a lot of this relates to people's knowledge about it, as well as access to food, healthy food. And this national study that USDA did found that, not surprisingly, that the cost of healthy food is a barrier to access. In our food poll, more than half the residents thought that community gardens were important, but many of them just don't have access to gardens, and that's another equity issue. And we looked at gardening programs around the region. Sacramento has, I think, close to 400 sites or spaces, but most of the other areas do not have very big community garden footprint. So that's a need. And then the other thing is, people with very low food insecurity, they are more interested in cooking and gardening classes So how do you get access to people for things like that? And, you know, all the research shows when you're exposed to good food and nutrition literacy at an early age, you substantially improve your health. And Santana Diaz, who's the chef at UC Davis Health, said by the time you get to the hospital, it's kind of too late because you built your lifetime up of all your bad habits or chronic issues like access to healthy food that affect your health status. So there's a big goal around this to intervene earlier in the food system and get information to people, especially children in school, and working through K through 12, not just around food and nutrition, but also agriculture, where your food comes from, how to steward your land, and then green neighborhoods, basically. And all these things can impact food and nutrition health. Next slide, please. So these actions include increasing investment in food literacy and food nutrition programs. And we have a great nonprofit that does that, the Food Literacy Center. They work with kids and they make eating vegetables fun. And the problem is the parents, not the kids. And then, this whole thing around access to gardening and cooking and learning ways and marketing and outreach. And this is where a lot of focus on culturally appropriate foods come in as well, and sensitivity to that, and then health promoting foods. So it's expensive to do community garden programs because you have ongoing operating costs with utilities and water. You have the cost of the land access and then remediating and adding infrastructure for irrigation and things like that. But very worthwhile programs. Research in West Sacramento with an urban ag program, which is those parcels are intended as not permanent uses, but they're great for now. They increase food safety and community security, but the cost of the properties goes up around them because there's good economic activity and things like that. So there's a good benefit to all of these kind of partnerships. And then I think this is getting close to the last slide. And next slide, please. So our next steps are that we have now created this investment strategy, and it's released today. We hope to be working with the Community Foundation next on looking at these funding sources aligned to specific priorities. We've been reaching out to lots of partners and soliciting specific project ideas like a food hub or a health nutrition program, and putting a cost to that, and trying to match them up with some of the new funding that's coming, but also looking at a financing mechanism that could invest in the food system. And part of this can be something like the Community Foundation has a healthy food fund, but it could be scaled up. They get money from Good Day of Giving and other things, but a bigger fund obviously would be more impactful. And the foundation could play a role, like to manage a family of funds, so other funders could even invest. And there's the nonprofit side of, supporting all these kind of activities for food safety, nutrition security, et cetera. But there's also an economic development side, which is funding farmers and food businesses and other kind of food producers, or financing for food system infrastructure projects like food hubs or incubators that could be nonprofit or for-profit. So we are looking to identify those other kind of funding sources, not only state and federal and with lenders, but an actual financing mechanism. California Capital is a nonprofit in the region that's just taken over our Small Business Development Center. This is not venture capital for ag tech. This is business financing for regular businesses. And then again, groups like the California Endowment had started a healthy food financing fund. It's managed now by a nonprofit called Community Vision. And the original goal was to build grocery stores in food deserts, but it's kind of evolved now to be these other kind of food system projects. So part of this is building the capacity in the food world so that establishments and entrepreneurs and organizations get access to funding to scale, because it is very expensive. And the costs are going up with supply chain pipeline challenges. So we now look forward to a conversation, and that is, we're going to be continuing to work with partners too in our own direct work of trying to see some of these projects. We're really interested in institutional procurement. We work with University of California Ag and Natural Resources and UC Davis on kind of trying to build food system projects. So I think there are a lot of opportunities there. And then just curious to see what you all think about the report and what resonates for you. And the CalFresh issues, getting people signed up, challenges or barriers you face. Maybe you have some success strategies for us that we could benefit from. So really just interested to hear what you think and how we can work together.